Buen día, amigos y amigas. Bienvenidos y bienvenidas al Rincón del Profe Jeff. Welcome to this next episode of our journey through Latin America and Spanish speaking countries. This week we are visiting, or this episode we are visiting, as the hat says, Puerto Rico, which is in the Caribbean, one of the coolest places that I've been able to visit. I actually had the opportunity to visit a couple of times, thanks to the over the my professional career so far, as part of a participation that we at New Mexico State have in conjunction with the AATSP, which is the American Association of Teachers of Spanish and Portuguese. Every summer there's a conference in different places. I may have talked about it before. Um, but over the years, and there are about 10 years in between the two trips, but we've been able to have the conference in Puerto Rico. And so it's been a kind of a fun thing. Never in my wildest dreams had I ever thought I would visit Puerto Rico, and enjoyed the trips there. One of the things that is interesting about Puerto Rico for those of us in the United States, if you're listening from the United States, since Puerto Rico is a territory of the United States, uh, Port, uh, Puerto Ricanos, I'll just call them Puerto Ricanos y Puertorriqueñas, are considered U.S. citizens, and we as U.S. citizens can travel there without needing a passport. So if you want to have a cool experience in a Spanish speaking country, well, Spanish is predominant, but English is also spoken. Many people speak English there as well, especially in and around San Juan. But you can you don't need to go through the processes of getting a passport. You can travel down there to visit. Just to kind of give some perspective, let me switch to the map if I can. There we go. Of course, we live here in Las Cruces and always fly out of El Paso when we're going places. So the first time I went with my wife, we flew through Atlanta. So it was El Paso to Atlanta and Atlanta to Puerto Rico. And the last time I went, I was traveling by myself. Went through Dallas and then nonstop from Dallas to Puerto Rico, all within about 8 or 9 hours. That's including the layover if you plan it right. So, not a super long trip, but you can be in a tropical paradise really quickly. Just to talk a little bit about where it's situated as well. Of course, um, in Spanish, these are called the Antillas Mayores, the Antilles Islands, and the biggest is, of course, Cuba, closest to the United States. Then we have the Isla Española, where with República Dominicana and Haiti and Dominican Republic share the island, uh, divided there by the border. And then further east, you'll see the smaller island of Puerto Rico, which then gives way to the British Virgin Islands, U.S. Virgin Islands, and all of these others that you see here on the map. So let's zoom in to Puerto Rico and get to know that a little bit more. Let me switch the view so we can kind of get the contrasts. I always like that. So you can see the green parts, the dry parts, and then the ocean parts, because ocean is a super important part of living on an island. It forms the natural border, but also a lot of what the culture relies on deals with the ocean and the tropical locations. So the capital city of Puerto Rico is obviously San Juan. Obviously, I make it sound like we should know that, but uh, the first group of people to inhabit the island are what we call Puerto Rico. They called Boricua, or the Taíno indigenous group, and they have a lot of things that they've offered to us. Of course, there aren't really any pure blood Taínos left in the world because of exterminations and things that of those nature which are common in our history, unfortunately. But they did import many things into the Spanish culture and language. It's kind of, we're just doing a high level, not in depth discussion of linguistic influences here, but there are some words that came from the Taíno language into Spanish that have come into English. One of the first ones I always think of is the word huracan. So that was the word in the Taíno language, which then was adopted by Spanish, and of course in English we call it hurricane. Of course, being in the Caribe, in the Caribbean or Caribbean, however you pronounce it, hurricanes, huracan or huracanes, are going to be part of your life. And unfortunately, back in, I believe it was 2017, we had Hurricane Maria go through and devastate much of Puerto Rico. So you can see that it's been a part of life on the island since the Taínos to our modern day. Other words you might recognize would be canoa or canoe, and the other one I can think of is barbacoa, which came from them, and of course that was the same for Spanish word, and we say barbecue in English. So if you're interested in doing that, I always include links to different places in the video description, so check that out, or check that out on your own to see what influences have come from this indigenous language, the Taíno. We've talked about it a little bit from other countries as well, but such an important part of the language is in contact with Spanish. Okay, so let's see. San Juan, the capital. Ponce, down here on the southern coast, is the second largest city. We have Mayagüez out here on the west coast, and Fajardo and Ceiba over here on the east coast. We'll visit a couple of those places. Another important city up here in the north is Arecibo. We'll show something from there here in a little bit, but I wanted to zoom in. Let's switch back to here so we can get some of the contrast. Is the placement of San Juan. Okay, you can see here that this is the Bahia de San Juan Bay is an important geographic area of the island, a deep port where ships could come in and out, and they would be naturally protected from storms and marauders, pirates, people who would try and come and fight or take over San Juan. This little peninsula here is where Viejo San Juan, or the older part of San Juan, was built. There's out here on the point, there's a fortress called San Felipe del Morro. We'll check that out in a little bit, but that was what protected San Juan from people who would enter in and try to, take over or ambush and control San Juan. We'll say that the first Europeans that showed up were, as you see here, it's called Castillo San Cristobal. Cristobal Colon, or Christopher Columbus, came to or landed in Puerto Rico as part of his second voyage in 1493, when he was on his voyages of discovery. And so it's been established since that time in history. So let's take a look at a couple of those pictures. So here's a picture of old San Juan from the Bahia de San Juan. You'll see down here the protective walls that have been built over the more than 500 years that San Juan has been a city from the colonial era. One thing that I really enjoy about Viejo San Juan is the architecture and the colors, brilliant colors, sharp painting, things like that. One of the coolest excursions I took was on the last trip here when they, in the kind of the recreation port where they have, sailboats and speedboats and things like that. There's a little business that has small boats that take up to 2 or 4 people, and so you can have your own boat or with your family or whatever you'd like, and then the guide goes out in front and you kind of just follow along driving your own boat, and he gives you a tour and talks about historical places and things about the Bahia de San Juan, and we buzzed around by this wall as part of that tour. So that was a lot of fun, good memory, and you could see, what I always imagine what things looked like from the older days, and of course what they look like now. As I mentioned before, this is the El Morro, which actually is part of the national park system. But one of the coolest memories I have of visiting San Juan was when my wife and I were walking up this street as we just decided to take a walk from the hotel to see how far it was to get up to Viejo San Juan. So this is the northern side of Viejo San Juan. This would be the northern coast of Puerto Rico. And as we came here, all of these grass areas, it was just, I don't even remember what day it was, whether it was a Saturday or a Sunday, probably a Sunday afternoon, and there were just hundreds of people, family groups and hanging out. They had blankets out. We're having picnics on the grassy areas, and because this would, mind you, this was in July, and it wasn't all that hot, because at least right here, because there's breeze always coming in off the ocean, and so people were enjoying themselves and flying kites and just hanging out and having a great time. So that's a good memory I have of that part of, the people in los puertorriqueños y puertorriqueñas just having a nice day hanging out. Okay. As we mentioned in the map, the second largest city is called Ponce, named after Ponce de Leon, the guy searching for the Fountain of Youth. This is from up in the mountains looking down. So this would be the southern coast that you see, the town out there. Didn't get to visit it, but I know it's known for its colonial architecture and influence. And there we see that. Mentioned before about Arecibo, and one of the cool things about Arecibo, let's see if we can zoom in and find it on the map. Hopefully we will without much issue. Of course, I found it earlier without a problem. Always looking in the wrong place. Where did you go? Where did you go? There it is, the Arecibo Observatory. So what we have there is an observatory. It's a radio telescope that is let me get the picture up here. It's a kind of in a natural area that they built this radio telescope that has helped to map the universe, and it's been seen in several movies, and is again, didn't get to see it in person, but have always been in awe of what of the things that they have discovered and shared with us from there. Okay, back to our map. We're going to travel. We're doing a lot of map and travel today, just because it's as a tiny country, it's kind of easy to do it that way. So, as we've said before, we can't talk about Puerto Rico without mentioning or showing pictures of the beach. Beaches all over the place. We went to a beach that was on the northern shore. This is actually one of the most famous ones, called the Playa Flamenco. It's on the island of Culebra, which is out here. When I picture beach in the Caribbean, this is probably what you think of: white sands and turquoise and blue water, uh, tropical paradise. But you can have your pick of all kinds of beaches as to what you would like to do there. We did, I didn't mention, so I will mention now. One of the cool things that we got to do in Puerto Rico is we visited this forest called El Yunque. And El Yunque is uh, part of the national park system of the United States, and it's the only rainforest in the whole system, located here on the island. And just a couple of pictures. This one I like because it shows the rainforest, the green. It's, I mean, stunningly green, waterfalls and things all over the place. There are a couple of places you can stop and actually get out and wade and play in the waterfalls. You're going to see all kinds of wildlife, especially hummingbirds and other types of animals as you go there. The the memory that I continue to bring back about Puerto Rico is just the diversity and biodiversity that exists there. And one of the other fun things that we got to do and see was out here in the eastern coast. There's a bioluminescent bay, meaning, so if you're not familiar with what that is, there are microorganisms, plankton in the water that when they're agitated, and of course they glow when they're agitated, but at night, obviously you can especially see them because they are glow in the dark, bioluminescent. And so one of the fun things that my wife and I decided to do was out here near Fajardo. We took off from this little bay beach area on a kayak trip, as you see there, and we actually followed this little route up here. It's through mangroves, and we ended up in this lagoon. It's called Laguna Grande. So we took off just before sunset and paddled all the way up through here with the guide and a group. We ended up here just after sunset, and as you slap your paddle or take your hand and stir the water, it glows all around, and even if you have some on your hand, you'll see it dripping off, and it's kind of a cool experience. Some people hopped out and went swimming, and as you swim and move, you'll agitate things. But then on our way back, one of the coolest things that I remember was, because this is connected to the ocean, there's a tide flow going in and out depending on when it's high tide. And so as you look down into the water, you could see fish swimming, because as they swam in the water, it would agitate those organisms and they would light up, so it would look like little comet trails going through the water in bioluminescent bay. So yeah, if you ever get the chance to go there, check that out. Well, so there, the one thing that I didn't get to test or sample much of was Puerto Rican food, except for, of course, one of the mainstays is plátanos. Those are plantains, and tostones. You eat them fried and baked and sweetened. So there are all kinds of ways to prepare plátanos, different than bananas. I know many people in Spanish learn plátanos, the word for banana, but it's plantain. And if you don't know the difference, you can look it up. And then banana, so plantain's more starchy, kind of like a potato type thing. Looks like a banana, but it's big. And then bananas are smaller and sweeter. So that's an important part of the culinary dishes that you'll find in Puerto Rico. I'll invite you to do your own research on some of those. One of I didn't get to try, but have always read about is a dish called Mofongo. So it has some interesting history behind it. Check that out in the video description below. But what I wanted to jump into now was a little bit about the perspective and the history. You know, again, we're doing top level. We're not getting deep down into it of of Puerto Rico and the United States. And I'll jump it off with this picture that we have here. This is a picture of the Puerto Rican Day in New York, which happens on the second Sunday in June, where the descendant or those Puertorriqueños y Puertorriqueñas that live in New York celebrate their culture and heritage. They shut down the streets, big party, parade, and all kinds of things like that. So just wanted you to have that view as we talk about it. We'll jump out and just visit about that influence and why New York and and just things of that nature. Sorry, I'm stumbling here, but it goes back to the connection of Puerto Rico being a part of the United States, not an official state. Many people call it a commonwealth or a free or associated territory. What that brings is the people in or from Puerto Rico are considered United States citizens, and there are lots of specific things that are granted and not granted with that status. So one of and I'm not going to say whether they're pros or cons. One of the things for Puerto Rico is that the citizens there pay no federal income tax. They do pay taxes on things like Social Security and Medicare, pay into those things. But as far as income tax is concerned, they don't. They are allowed to, and we'll put that in air quotes, serve in the military. So, and that was a big part of what happened in World War One, and especially World War Two, which will come in a second. But every now and again, and the most recent one, I believe, was a referendum. And they've had many referendums over the years, and these are always referendums that are proposed by the local government, the territorial government. So in Puerto Rico, they have a governor who's elected by the people in Puerto Rico. They have a House and a Senate in the Capitol building there in San Juan. And over the years, and I'm not going to specify which years are those, the information's in the video description below, but you'll be able to see that there were various referendums where they wanted to, those Puerto Ricanos wanted to gain knowledge on, or get perspective from the people in their country as to what would be the next step for Puerto Rico. And the choice, as I understand it, there have always been three choices, and it has varied as I did a little bit of research over the different referendums over the years. The main three choices are: do we stay as we are, as a Estado Libre Asociado, Commonwealth of the United States? Do we declare our own independence and become our own country, or should we become a state of the United States? And at different points in history, different um, proposals have won the popularity of the people. But once again, that's something that was proposed by their local government. In order for them to be considered as a new state, that would have to be something that's done with a national type of referendum instead of a local one. But it's as far as politics are concerned, if you're a student of political science, it's super interesting to read about those kind of things. Again, not passing any judgment one way or the other, but inform yourself on what are the different benefits and backfalls, or you can say advantages, disadvantages of each one of those different items on the referendum. Okay, but uh, what that did cause was that as things got worse and worse in Puerto Rico, that meant that there was natural migration from Puerto Rico to other parts of the United States, and particularly after the Second World War, there was a huge need for labor in big cities, and when you think of like New York, there were all kinds of opportunities for migrants to come and work, and so since they're already considered U.S. citizens, it was a natural migration for those Puerto Ricanos to come to New York, and so part of New York, Spanish Harlem, I believe it's called, was where they've been established. I mean, you can go back and see the old West Side Story movies or play, and that's a kind of, it's not. I'm not going to say it's historically accurate, but it gives you an idea of where that's started entering into culture, and so that's an important part of who they are, and that it's such a point. The migration became to such a point that there's actually a term that was coined for the Puerto Ricans that live in New York, and it's called Nuyorican, Nuyoriqueños, I believe it's called in Spanish. But it's it's kind of an interesting dichotomy when you look at, you can compare it to the Mexican American movement, the Chicano movement, because here are these people that aren't, I mean, they have descendants in a tropical place, but here they are in a huge city, you know, totally different things, and people calling them, oh, you're neither from there, or you're not from here. So a lot of the authors in the Nuyorican era have explored that, and I'll share some of those statements in our closing, as I usually do with authors from those places. But when you think about it, the los Puerto Ricanos have offered so much to both their own culture and to the culture in the United States. I mean, for those of us, those of you, I'm not a good dancer, but for those of you that like dancing la salsa, of course, that's where things like that come from. When you think of influence of music from Puerto Rico, we can just list modern day artists like students always talk about listening to Bad Bunny, and Daddy Yankee, of course, and then older, not older, but other pop artists like Mark Anthony, of course, is one of the most famous. And that's the kind of influence that they're having on culture in general. And I think we all kind of can identify with that. Let me I had a list because I can't remember everyone, but I wanted to share a list that I printed out of famous Puerto Ricanos, and when we talk about that, they could have either been born in Puerto Rico or in places like New York. I must say, as I did some research on the population center of Puerto Ricanos in New York, that it's overall declining a little bit, and that, of course, deals with more economic issues, and so they're leaving, not necessarily going back to Puerto Rico, but to other parts of the country. So we'll start with some of the artists and musicians you might be familiar with. Of course, we mentioned Mark Anthony, Bad Bunny, Daddy Yankee. Many of you remember Ricky Martin, Living La Vida Loca. You around Christmas time, you may remember the song called Feliz Navidad by Jose Feliciano from Puerto Rico. Some famous actors, of course. This is one that I grew up with and knew. My mom was a big fan of her. Was Rita Moreno. She was, I think, got her start with acting in West Side Story. As I noted here, She is the first Latin to win what's called the EGOT, EGOT, the Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony. So she's won them all and is, legend as far as that goes. Rosie Perez. When we look at maybe some political figures, I'm reading here about Sonia Sotomayor, who first Latina to be on the Supreme Court. When we think of sports, of course, you can't talk about sports from Puerto Rico without mentioning baseball, and then specifically Roberto Clemente, who's the first Latino to be elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame. So yeah, the one of my favorite authors from Puerto Rico is Julia de Burgos. I remember reading a poem called La Casa from her, and very impactful. But since we are down to probably gone on a little too long, thanks for your patience with us today. But I'd like to read some of the. We're going to do a variety of quotes today from some of these authors that we'll mention, and some are considered Puerto Ricanos, and some are considered Nuyoricans, and it's always interesting to see their comments and the struggles that they share, that are struggles that all Puerto Ricanos, Puerto Ricanas experience. We'll start with one from Julia de Burgos. She says, Yo quise ser como los hombres quisieron que yo fuese. I always wanted to be what men wanted me to be. Un intento de vida, un juego al escondite, a little attempt at life, a little hide and seek game con mi ser, with my inner self. Pero yo estaba hecha de presentes, but I was made from the present. We have René Marquez, who said, Nosotros no nos vamos de nuestra patria. Nuestra patria es la que se nos va de nosotros. So he says that we aren't leaving our homeland, nuestra patria. Our homeland is what is going out of us. So talking about how living in different places, not in where you're from, that the homeland leaves you instead of you leaving it. Okay. Here we go with, let's see. Sandra María Esteves said, Soy hija de la isla y de la ciudad. I am a daughter of the island and of the city. Talking about the Nuyorican combo here. De la montaña y del concreto, from the mountains or the backcountry or concrete. En mi sangre canta el tambor de los ancestros. In my blood, the beating of the drums is the beating of the drums of my ancestors. Recordándome siempre quién soy, reminding me who I am. And we'll close with this. Well, there's two more. This is Miguel Piñero, considered a Nuyorican author. It says, Nuyorican, not from here, not from there, carrying the island in my veins, but walking these cold city streets. And we'll close with one from Tato Laviera, who said, Mi lengua no es español, no es inglés, es Spanglish, con sabor a coquito y acento de Bronx. He says, so my language is not Spanish or English, it's Spanglish, a little bit from Puerto Rico and a little bit from the Bronx. So I invite you to do your own discoveries about Puerto Rico. If you do have the opportunity at some point in your life to go there, I hope you do, and appreciate the things that los puertorriqueños y las puertorriqueñas have offered their own the Puerto Rican culture, but also into the culture at large. Okay. Bueno, muy bien, muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.